Chapter 4, we're going to be kind of getting into just some not necessarily complicated things, but just easy peasy, we should think of everyday things. Things that are normal, things to talk about, things we talk about a lot at church, but we don't necessarily apply to our lives. So, that being said, in chapter 4, verse 1, it says, "What is the source of war and fights among you?" Right now, it'd be easy to view outside of ourselves. What do we have to do with fights or wars around us? It's easy to say, well, that's because of this political party or this one, or that's because the people overseas, whatever it is. But I need you to see something in the following verse. He's not talking about the wars and fights that you're not involved in, right? He's going to go forward and he says, "Don't they come from your passions that wage war within you?" It says your passions. So the wars that we're talking about, the fights that we're talking about, are things that are within you, and they begin. So it says, "What is the source of wars and fights among you?" And then he answers it. He said, "They come from your passions that wage war within you." And you're like, well, I'm very passionate about Christ and things like that. But think about the things that are not of Christ, because Christ wouldn't create war. Christ would create peace. So if that was our only passion, then we'd have nothing but peace around us, not only within ourselves, but among ourselves, right? It says in verse 2, it says, "You desire and do not have. You murder and covet and cannot obtain. You fight and wage war. You do not have because you do not ask." In verse 2 there, it says, "You desire and do not have. You murder." Now, it's not necessarily talking about real murder there. It is perhaps more likely the murder that James speaks of refers to the intense anger that we all have, right? The intense anger that comes from the passions within us. We murder it's hard to say that we murdered Christ within ourselves, but this is exactly what it is talking about. The passions that we do that come from within, we are more or less murdering out the things that Christ can do through us, that Christ calls us to be passionate about. We murder those out. So it says you murder and covet and cannot obtain. You cannot obtain the ultimate goal, which would be perfection, right? So he sent Christ and he gave this. But then he gave us something to aim for. But we cannot obtain that because we murder Christ within ourselves. We get rid of the things that he calls us to be passionate about. How many of y'all are passionate about loving one another?
Amen.
It's hard to do, but this is the thing. We say, "Oh, well, just some people are hard to love," and you're absolutely correct. But that's a justification to you murdering that part of Christ out of your life, and that's not what we're called to do. He says, "You fight and wage war. You do not have because you do not ask." What he's talking about here is when we speak. Now we've opened our spiritual eyes to know that we are murdering parts of Christ within us. So we do not obtain because we do not ask. We do not have because we do not ask. We don't ask Christ, "Hey, help me to love someone," right? How many times have you found that in your prayer lately? Not very many, right? Or better yet, when we go into Walmart, we try to, if we see someone we don't like, someone that's annoying, we dodge them. But how many of y'all prayed that you would see that one person, the most annoying person? "Lord, please let me run into that annoying person today."
No.
Matter of fact, that prayer would be better than our prayer that we have because we're not praying about it at all. I figure if we prayed that prayer, he'd go, "You know what? You called him annoying, but that's okay. We'll work on it. At least you asked to see that person." We don't do that, though. We murder out Christ rather than the things that are passionate. We're waging war within ourselves. He says, "You ask with wrong motives. You don't receive." So first off, you do not ask, so we don't receive at all. And then he says, "And you ask and don't receive," so that we don't ask for the things Christ calls us to be passionate about. We don't ask about those things, so we do not receive. And then he says, "And then you ask and you don't receive because you ask with wrong motives." We're like, "Dear Lord," whatever that prayer looks like. I can't do that because I'm just a very holy person. I can't. No, I ask all the time. I can think of, "Dear Lord, please let me forget to set back my clock so that I can have an excuse to miss work," right? We ask with wrong motives in mind so that you may spend it on your pleasures. When we ask, I've been taught as a kid all the way up till now, "Ask and you shall receive." And then I was like, well, how come, as a kid, I was like, well, how come nobody's asking for money, right? That's my logic. I'm like, wow, if that was the case, I'm going to start asking for money. But then where's my motive in that? If it was, dear Lord, I'm asking for money so that I could achieve something for a pleasure that is within me, then my heart would cry out for that. My prayer, my life would represent that. Right? I would be at peace with that. But instead, I ask with wrong motives so that I may spend it on my own pleasures like fishing boat, things like that, golf clubs. Frying pans, golf clubs, frying pans. Yeah, I got it set. They don't golf themselves. They're not very good at it, but yeah. It says in verse 4, it says, "You adulterous people." Now I loved that I got to get into this because most of y'all are like, I don't commit adultery. But think about this: when you took a vow, I kind of talked about this morning. When you took a vow to meet Christ, or when you took a vow with your wife, you became one through Christ. When you took a vow with Jesus, you became one, right? So everything that is not of Him is time that you've taken away from Him. It is passions that you've played against Him. These are things so that is adultery. I mean, it is down to the T what adultery means. If instead of spouse you would put the ultimate spouse, right? Christ. He says, don't you know that friendship with the world is hostility towards God? Now here's one thing. People try to justify adultery in their relationships all the time with, well, I was just trying to be nice. Well, here I'm just going to point this out. He says, in adultery of Christ is when you have friendship with the world. It's hostility towards Christ. It's showing love where He had the love to obtain, right? It says hostility towards God. So whoever wants to be friend of the world becomes the enemy of God. All right. So it's kind of like this, and we're getting there. Better wait first. Yeah, we'll get there. It says in 5, it says, "Or do you think it's without reason that the Scriptures say the Spirit He made to dwell in us is envies intensely." Sorry, I'm not very good on pronunciation today. It says, or do you think? So he says, so you want to become friends with the world, but to become a friend of the world, you become an enemy of God. And he says, or do you think it's without reason that the Scriptures say the Spirit He made to dwell in us envies intensely? Every day that I follow Christ, I should want that. I should long for that even more. And then also within that, there are things in my life that I should want to put away. Right? Mm-hmm. That I should want to more and more give up each day. I didn't say it wasn't going to be a battle. Right? What I said though is I long for that. Right? How many of y'all have things in your lives that you're like, man, I really wish I could quit this? Mm-hmm. I bet at one point in time that started with, hey, man, I have to get rid of this. And then it got hard and we picked it back up and we were like, man, I need to get rid of this. And then it turned to, man, I'm trying to get rid of it. Right? Trying to get rid of it. It's like an old broke down car. Right? I need to get rid of that. And then you're like, man, I wish I could get rid of that. And then the next thing you know, your wife gets rid of it. Right?
Oh.
Just kidding. She loves me and all my cars that are junk. That we have many of. So here's a place that I've never seen until today. In verse 6, it says, "But He gives greater grace. Therefore," He says, "God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble." Now, one thing I want you to see here is God resists the proud. To resist. The word resist is a military term. It's used to describe an army arrayed for battle. To remain in sinful pride is to invite God's battle array against you. Right? To remain somewhere where you know you should not be spiritually is to invite God to battle you. Have you ever thought of that? You're like, wow. We say God is the Most High King and He's so great and He's so powerful, and then we invite Him to battle us. Right? Kind of the same thing. He resists the proud but gives grace to the humble, and that's the flip-flop of it. He gives grace to the humble. He has grace upon someone who's trying. Right? Who says, you know what, I know it's hard to give this up, but I know through Christ I can gain that, but I'm trying to give it up. Right? I'm trying, but better yet, rather than material things that we're trying to get up. Because most people would say, this is talking about tobacco, things like that you're trying to give up, drinking, drugs. But I want you to see something. To get somewhere, it takes effort.
Yes.
Something you have to long for. God has grace to help you get there when you humble yourself. When you say, you know what, Lord, I know that there's no way to get perfection. But I know that there are things that I could do to get me there. But Lord, it's going to take your direction. And to do that would be me humbling myself, saying, I know I couldn't get there alone. It's kind of like when we talk about heaven. That's how we all describe it. We say you can't get there without Christ, and you can't. We had to admit that. We had to humble ourselves, knowing that there was nothing I could do to get me there. But Christ met me there, and He had grace upon that. In verse 7 it says, therefore submit to God. I don't like that. Because that means I have to give something up. I have to tap. I'm in battle. When Paul says, battling flesh, I see that and I'm like, okay, that means I'm strong enough to do it. No. I got to submit to God. I got to allow God to show me, what do I need to get rid of? How do I get there? It's hard. It says, resist the devil and he will flee from you. Now, here's how I know that we're failing as Christians. You want to know why? Because I don't see the devil fleeing from us. He promises us. He says, submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. But here's the best part of that. They put those together. It's one verse. He says, therefore, submit to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. So when I submit to God, then I therefore, it happens because I submitted to God, I resist the devil. Because my passion within me is to be better, to be like Christ, and I have nothing more to give but that. Yeah. And Christ shows me a way. And in temptation, He provides the way out before temptation happens.
Amen.
So through that, we resist the devil and he flees from us. I don't see very many demons or the devil fleeing from me in my daily life. Matter of fact, what I see is the temptation comes in. And it comes in hard. And then these thoughts, and it devours me. So what that tells me is I haven't fully submitted to God yet. Because if I did that, then I would be able to resist the devil. And the devil would not only leave, but he would run. He would flee. He'd say, you know what, that Brandon guy, we're not going to mess with him no more. We're going to go away. Right? Now that doesn't mean he won't come back. It doesn't say he flees forever. He says he flees. He flees the scene of the crime. He goes away and he's gone. But he will return. In 8, it says, draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. I like that. Many people say knocking, he's knocking, answer the door. But here, to draw near to God, for someone to say, I don't know what God's will is for my life. Well, friend, you're not drawing near God. Because when you draw near to God, He will draw near to you. Yeah. That means taking the things that I've been told spiritually. If something's not happening in my life and I've been told that's what's spiritual and it's not working, then maybe I should try something different.
Yeah, right.
Maybe, just maybe, there's a different way to draw near to God than what I've been taught. Maybe, just maybe, if I open the book rather than carry it, maybe I'll draw near to God. Better yet, maybe when I open the book and I read it, if I try to apply it, maybe, just maybe, I'll draw near to God. He will draw near to God. Cleanse your hands, sinners, and purify your hearts. You double-minded. Now, cleanse your hands. That's an easy one right now with the corona thing going around. We're all washing our hands as many times as we can. Flu season in the South is terrible. Everybody's got a bottle of hand sanitizer in the holster. It's like, I seen a guy the other day. I'm not even lying. He had 2 holsters. Neither one of them had a gun. Number 1 had hand sanitizer, and the other one had Tabasco. Wasn't going to ask. I shook the man's hand, right? Because you can't help but applaud someone that carries around Tabasco. He's a serious warrior. He's ready to go at battle with anything that comes along, whether that be Taco Bell or. I don't remember talking to Siri, but They're listening. They're listening, guys. So, anyways, yeah, I had to shake that guy's hand. I paid for his meal. Because he had the back. He's far more prepared than I ever will be. I always heard the saying, it was, if you're always prepared, you never have to get prepared. He was prepared for anything. Anything. And besides someone to rob him. He didn't have a gun, but I don't know. I guess he could throw the Tabasco at him. And it's cleanse your hands. Okay, so to cleanse your hands, when you're talking spiritually, to cleanse your hands would be to wipe your things of things you've done.
Yes.
Wipe away with them. Cleanse your hands. So how does that happen? Once again, it puts these in one verse. So they become one, so that you would read them. Even if I just blindly opened the Bible and I said, you know what, I'm going to read in James chapter 4, verse 8. And I just read this Bible verse. It said, draw near to God and He will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands. When I draw near to God, I am cleansing my hands of what has happened. It says, sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Purify your hearts. Once again, we're talking about wars and fights. They come within here. They come within motives. Within inside me. Within inside me. I learned that in magazine. Within inside me.
Thank you.
It says, and purify your hearts. Purify your hearts. How many of y'all are going home and you're working on your hearts? You're like, huh? How do you do that? Are you, honestly, I'll tell you how to purify your heart is to go outside the norm of your heart. That would be to push yourself far beyond what you've ever thought or ever expected of yourself. Whether that be kindness, gentleness, the fruits of the Spirit. That's how you purify your heart. You long for these things that you never longed for before. Because Christ, when Christ comes, when you have an encounter with Christ, it changes you. And if it's not, then guess what? I can promise you, you're not drawing near to God. Because you're not cleansing nothing. Nothing's cleansing. And then, like we talked about this morning in Malachi, then you were saying that the altar that Christ has built, that came, that it's not good enough to make you clean. It says, in 9, it says, be miserable and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Now people are like, man, if they read this out of context right now, they'd be like, man, Christ calls us to be miserable and mourn and weep. Let my laughter be turned to mourning and joy to gloom. Well, I think we've matched this one pretty good. You're doing good, Christians. We're pretty good about that. Keep them 15 minutes over and they're mad and miserable. But you let them go eat for too long at the Mexican restaurant and they're miserable. He says, and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord and He will exalt you. Now this isn't, if you take that just as it is, it wouldn't make sense, right? Because Christ is joy. Christ is laughter. There's time for these things. And actually in the next chapter it talks about that. But to be miserable and mourn and weep is saying that everything that I'm called to do, there's a time for that. That Christ, everything of Christ doesn't just come of everybody's happy-go-lucky. It means that I would mourn and I would be miserable. I'm miserable because I know where my spirituality's at. I'm miserable because of that. And I mourn and I weep because I know how many unsaved people there are out there. What are the chances that they're going to heaven? Well, I'm not sharing the gospel, so it's not very high. It says, let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and He will exalt you. It's saying, I know that my joy comes from the Lord, but I also know that these other things come from the Lord. There are times for these things. And He says, humble yourselves before the Lord, and He will exalt you. Meaning that if you find joy, it was within the Lord. If you were, that would be weird to say. If you were miserable, it is within the Lord. Yeah. But when you mourn and you weep, it's for the people around you. It's where you pushed your heart. Your heart is now purified to feel these things that were meant, right? These things that were meant to be felt. In verse 11, it says, don't criticize one another, brothers and sisters. Don't criticize one another. We're really good at that. We like to talk about each other or tell each other what we're doing wrong. It's really easy. And sometimes we like to say, well, that's constructive criticism. Well, if it was not encouraging, then I can promise you it probably wasn't very constructive. All right? It says, and so anyone who defames or judges a fellow believer defames and judges the law. The law, the royal law, which was love yourself as, or love love your neighbor as you love yourself. And if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is one lawgiver and judge who is able to save and to destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor? It's saying that, you know what, you can criticize all day long. You can pick out something because no one's perfect. You can do that all day long. But then he reminds us that he created the law. We're not perfect. And then we're judging the people, but we're also judging the law. And then he says, but there is only one lawgiver and judge who's able to save. See, that's the best part of that. When we criticize, we can't fix nobody. Right?
That's right.
We can tell them how to do it, but we can't do it. But when he judges, he's able to save. That's why he's able to judge. Because he can do it. And then also, though, it says, and to destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor? You have no power. Right? The power that we find is through Christ. But when we don't tap into that, then who are we? It says in 13, it says, come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will travel in such and such city and spend a year over there. How many of y'all are procrastinators? Yeah. I'm not even going to look up because I know I'm one. I don't want to think bad thoughts about y'all. I don't want to judge. It says, come now. You were saying, I like talking to people that are like, yeah, I'll probably, or when I invite someone to church. Now, this is just an example. I need you to know that salvation doesn't just happen in church. But I've invited a couple of my buddies from wherever. Like, yeah, when are you going to come to church with me? And they're like, oh, yeah, we're going to, actually, I was talking to my wife, and we decided we're going to come. Like, yeah, and in my head I'm thinking, I am 45 minutes away from you. There are hundreds of churches right here. What would make you want to come to my church? And then I remember this Bible verse. Yeah, they're just talking about today or tomorrow. Yeah, okay. But I got, I try to encourage them to go to their church. That way maybe, just maybe they'll go. Maybe they just like me that much. Who knows? All y'all are here. I know, it's my wife. I know. It says, come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will travel to such and such city and spend a year there and do business and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. Now, we're good about saying that. We don't know what tomorrow will bring. Don't worry, sweetie. We don't know. We don't. But then it's like, when we're called to action, we don't want to go then. We want to wait till tomorrow, but we don't know that we got tomorrow. So it's like Christians don't make sense. That makes sense, though. It says, yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring, what your life will be. That's what I like. Life defined for a Christian is Christ. He brings life, he gives life, he is life. So he says, what your life will be. That means within me is life. Every bit of it. I found it. And now I long for it. So that would mean I can say that tomorrow, next week, I'll be preaching at Victory Baptist Church. But if I put plans on that, and I bank on just the fact that I'm going to be here, then that would mean I'm saying my life will never move. Right? I'm not leaving. That's not what. What I'm saying is what your life will be. Christ calls us. Maybe one day I may not be called to pastor. I have to recognize that. I have to know that my life changes because it's alive. And our spirituality is dead because we don't consider it to be alive. We're like, oh yeah, I'm called to preach. And I'm like, well, is that all you're ever going to be? And they're like, yes. Pastors will say that all day long. Absolutely. And I'm like, wow. That's crazy to know that your spirituality will never change. Right? Now, I'm not saying that it couldn't not change. Maybe that's your calling for the rest of your life. But to say something so bold as to that's what I'll always be, that's not life. It says, for you are like a vapor that appears for a little while, then vanishes. I like that. He follows up with, you don't know what your life's going to be. And then he follows that up. He says, for you are like a vapor that appears for a little while, then vanishes. We've talked about Christ. Christ came died 2,000 some odd years ago.
Come on.
I'm not good at math, okay? It says, and then in this whole time, these same people read these same words. And they were inspired to do different things. And as we say, history repeats itself, but throughout Christianity, history hasn't repeated itself. It continues to either fester, but now we're getting to like where it's not moving anymore. And that bothers me. That bothers me because I know that if people would say, that's people saying that church will always happen, or things will always happen. We'll never have persecution in America. Those are bold statements. He says, for you are like a vapor that appears for a little while, then vanishes. We should live our life as if the vapor that is here may be the last bit of life here. Think of that. Maybe you're the last bit of oxygen in Boonville, Arkansas. People can't live without Arkansas. Or oxygen. People can live without Arkansas. They do it all the time. I don't know how they do it. I mean, all the Californians think that it's cool to go to Arkansas to live.
That's right.
Norm?
That's right.
So just think of that. So if you're like a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes, what kind of impact could they say about you being a vapor? Right? This is just a minor vapor that would be within the wind, that when the wind would shift, the vapor would blow away. But what could they say about that? When people get the flu, I mentioned this earlier, when people get the flu, people wash their hands like crazy because they know it's in the air. It has an effect. Matter of fact, everybody around you probably catches it. What kind of vapor, what are you affecting around you? What kind of vapor are you? Right? Maybe you're here and no one ever knew it and you blew away, and guess what? No one ever talked about it. No one ever seen it. It says 15, instead you should say, if the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. Right? If it's the Lord's will, then it's the Lord's will. I'll be here forever, but I can't say I'm going to be here forever. Nor could I say that I'll live in Boonville, Arkansas forever, or however that goes on. Nor could I say this will be my job forever, or these will be my friends forever. Not that they would never forever be my friends, or that they would be my only friends forever. Looking at these things, because he tells us, he said, instead live. You should say, if the Lord's will, we will live and do that or this or that. But as it is, you boast in the arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So when you make a bold statement about what will happen in the future, I want you to know that that's arrogant. And your boasting is what is evil. It says in 17, so it is sin to know the good and yet not do it. Now here's where we're at. And I love that it ended that chapter with this. It says, so it is sin to know the good and yet not do it. As Christians, we justify this all the time. We're like, well, yeah, the Lord told me, or I felt kind of pulled to do that, but I'll get it next time. Right? It is sin to know what is good and yet not do it. One day, okay, it's bad to say that I hate. Okay, I work in Fort Smith, so every off-ramp you get off of, there are people there with signs all the time. And I don't know who's homeless or not, because they all kind of look the same. If I wasn't homeless and I wanted to get money, I would dress up like a homeless person. That's just the reality of it. Fort Smith did a story about it where they followed some of these people right back to their nice cars. And then there were a couple that they followed that were truly homeless. They had nowhere to go. They were just coming into Fort Smith in hopes to find a bed in the Hope shelter that they have. One day I was going through there, and like I said, I like to eat. So I went through the McDonald's, and I was in a really big rush, and I had 2 cheeseburgers, and I was pulling off the off-ramp, and I looked over, and this sign said, I'm hungry. That's all it said. And I was like, no. And I ate my cheeseburger. And then I pulled up to the hospital, and I ate my other one, and I felt so sick. I felt so sick because I knew there was something more to that, right? The sign was simple, but within me, my passion was to feed God's people, right? As a call of a pastor, it's the same thing, to feed God's people. And I couldn't even literally hand a cheeseburger that I had over. It cost me $1 some odd. I couldn't hand that over because I thought, what if it's fake? You know, I bet there are times in my life when God's saying, why should I bless you? What if it's fake? Right?
Right.
I see that, and I felt so sick, and I went home that day, and I told my wife, I said, yeah, I told her that story, and I said, and I just felt so bad. And I've never seen that person yet, ever. Yeah, I haven't seen that person yet. But if I ever do, and I have another cheeseburger, I'll know.
Give it up.
But that's not the point, right? It says it was sin to know what was good. And you're like, well, I don't always know what's good. Like I said, you don't know how many of them. But there was something tugging on me, telling me, hey, you need to give that cheeseburger up. And then the flesh within me said, no, you're hungry. I didn't need that cheeseburger, as you can see. In chapter 5, we're going to start this, probably won't finish, but that's okay. In chapter 5 it says, come now, you rich people. Now when we see this, we're like, oh, okay, that's not me. I'm not rich, right? I want to remind you something. You're not living in poverty, okay?
Amen.
All y'all are not homeless. I hope not. If you are, come get me. I'll get you a cheeseburger, okay? It says, come now, you rich people. We're all rich. And then here's another part about that. If we were rich in what Christ tells us to be rich in, he says, let the message of Christ dwell among you richly.
That's right.
So should this not be referring to me right now?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, but the message of Christ don't dwell among... I couldn't give up a cheeseburger, man. It wouldn't dwell among me richly. It says, weep and wail over the miseries that are coming on you. And then it's like, oh, yeah, like I said, I'm not rich, but you're not poor. So technically I would consider you more rich than poor. If everything is taken care of in your life, then I would consider you rich.
Yeah.
Because you have everything you need.
Right.
Weep and wail over the miseries that are coming to you. And you're like, oh man, this is in the Bible. Weep and wail over the miseries that are coming to you. And you're like, wait a minute. Let me intervene. Let me be Moses real quick. On behalf of myself. What are you talking about? I need the miseries that are coming. And he says, too. He says, your wealth has rotted and your clothes are moth-eaten. Your wealth. We're like, that's money. No, that's not money. Your wealth. Where are you pulling? Like, what makes you, where do you find that you're rich in? Think about that. Wealth is something that you have abundance of. Right? That doesn't mean abundance of number. I mean abundance like you have more than you need of it, and that's what you long for, your wealth. Same thing we're going for the rich people is they had money, they had lots of gold and jewelry and things like that. They had big houses, and that was where they found their wealth. In our lives, though, our wealth is found in many things. Right? Our time, we have an abundance of time. Each second counts. So if I place that in, because everybody here has time. Not everybody here can keep time, but everybody here has time. It says your time has rotted. Right? And now look, oh wow, that's starting to make sense now. I was rich with time. God bless me. If you count the seconds, if you add up the seconds that you've had in your life, you've had it very abundant. Right? Some people don't live that long. Some people don't make it out the womb. Some people die before that. So I'm rich in time. Now think of that, your wealth is rotted. Your time is rotted. Because then I think, how much time did I spend doing what I knew was wrong? Or what, better yet, how much time did I spend doing what I knew was not good? Right? Not doing good. It says, your gold and silver are corroded. Oh, wait, no, go back. And your clothes are moth-eaten. What he's saying is people can see it. Right? Your wealth is rotten. People can see it by the way you carry yourself. If you're spending more and more time with the Lord and you're drawing near, then guess what happens? You begin to do good. It's an outcome of it. So when you begin to do good, then people see that. They see that on you. They're like, you have a glow that is about you. When that happens. It says your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will be a witness against you. The things you find your wealth to be in will be a witness against you. Because that's what you longed for. When it talked about fights and wars before, that's what you fought for. When you fight for something and you have God on your side, you achieve it. When you fight for something that is worldly, you may achieve it, but it's going to rot right in front of you. And that's going to be your witness. One of these days, You're going to be sitting there and you're going to look at all the wealth. And you're like, wow, I have nothing. It'll hit you one day. It'll happen. It says, and their groves will be witness against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. It says you have stored up treasure in the last days. Look, the pay that you withheld from the workers who mowed your fields cries out, and the outcry of the harvesters has reached the ears of the Lord of the hosts. This is where I'm going to end tonight, right here. It says, look, the pay you withheld from the workers. I want you to think something. You are working for a master that is Christ, a great king right now.
Yeah.
You've been placed somewhere that has fields of people. Right? An abundance of people. You've been placed there not only for just money, but you've been given money. If you have an abundance of money, then Christ has called you to use that however His will is. Also, though, time. Different things. But think about this real quick. Who mowed? Okay. So the pay that you withheld from the workers. Think about this. What if all those people were standing in a field that I have not shared the gospel with, and boom. They're just standing there. I looked out. Matter of fact, what if it was the last day and they were all bound for hell? Guess what? The outcry of the harvesters would reach the ears of the Lord of the hosts, right? You not see what's happening in Boonville, Arkansas, America, the world? We see these things, and we put no blame on ourselves, because we're like, it had nothing to do with me. But it absolutely had every bit to do with me. Because something has to give. Somewhere it has to give. Something has to change. It takes one Christian to change one thing. Well, none of us are willing to give up anything. So that means we're locked. And we're not submitting from God, so the devil has no reason to flee. And then we're not drawing near. So what are we doing? Ask yourself, what are you doing here? If things are changing around you, if things change within you, things change around you.
That's right.
That's right.
But when we're stuck in a place, we really don't want anything to change. Because we're compliant with where we're at, and we're saying, God's altar was never good enough. Right? I'm going to pray. You think about that, though. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I thank you for this day. I thank you for your people, Lord, that are here tonight. Lord, I pray that the message of you would dwell among us richly, Lord. As we walk out the doors, Lord, I pray we'd just go home. Tonight, Lord, that we would just go home, we would reflect on all the seconds that have passed. Lord, I pray that we would know that our time is rotted. Lord, I pray, though, that every second that is left, that we would use it to draw near to you, Lord, that the devil would flee not only in our own homes, Lord, that he would flee from Boonville, that he would flee from Arkansas, Lord, that we would see a revival nationwide that started within ourselves. Lord, I pray that you would just convict us. Lord, I pray this week you would just weigh heavy on our hearts. And Lord, I pray if there's something in our lives that we know is good, Lord, I pray that we would go out and we would do it. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.